Good morning. I'm a little bit excited. I'm also a bit nervous, but I'd just like to thank Rose and Sue for such awesome presentations in the state of Australian agriculture and where we're going, where we could possibly go. I'm now rewriting my speech, my talk to you guys, in my head on the fly after those two fantastic presentations, so you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. But this is where I live, on Palawa country, and I'd just like to pay my respects to the traditional owners, past, present and emerging, and also to the farmers who've lived there before me. I haven't been a farmer for long, but the farmers that were there before have set the tone for what I can do now. And so I'd just like to pay my respects to all the farmers who've been going for a very long time. Every day I feel really lucky to be a farmer there. I open the curtains or get out on the farm and I look to see what I've got, and I think I live in a little bit of paradise. And I think as farmers we possibly all feel that way. So who am I? That's a really interesting question. I have to ask myself that frequently, especially today. I used to be a researcher. I used to be an ecologist. I used to go out around from the equator to the poles, catching wildlife, and then looking to see how they lived in their environment, how they adapted to change, how they actually moved, lived, and went on about their lives. And if I start talking about seals at any length after this point, please stop me. I could be here for hours. But 12 years ago, I left that career to become a farmer. But why would I do that? I was successful, I had grants, I had everything that an academic could want. Sometimes I feel a little bit of a fraud, standing up in front of a class saying, this is how we could do stuff. These are all how ecology works. Well, in some ways, I feel a little bit of a fraud today. But I've been there for 12 years, and I work on our farm with strong ecological principles, trying to put this into practice. And when I think deep down, why did I do this? It's because I loved studying nature. I've always loved nature. But now I get to work with it, and that was the difference. I loved nature, but I wanted to actually do something with it in myself. So 12 years later, Kate, my wife, and I have a farm. Our primary industry is a goat dairy. We value add into cheese. We have a meat brand as well. I hope you enjoyed the goat last night. We also have a small beef herd. And recently, we've gone into skincare products. We're trying to reduce our waste on farm. But where is Leap Farm? If you can see apparently there's a green laser pointer here. Just there, lower southeast coast of Tasmania. Will it reach? Just about. It's beautiful. We love living there. Just in summary of what we do, small scale. We use ecological principles behind everything we do. And I read a report by the MLA back when we very first started that spoke about high stocking density operations versus medium stocking density operations. The medium stocking density operation outperformed financially the high stocking density because it increased the resilience of the farm. And that's what biodiversity and nature can do for you. Why would I care about biodiversity? Well, I've sort of started to highlight that. But enough from me. I'd like to learn a little bit about you. Who can tell me where the greatest amount of land biodiversity is? In the soil. The lady over there, she was first, so you get some skin cream. Come see me afterwards. So in the soil. That's where it all is. But if I could ask a couple more questions. If someone came to you and said, would you increase biodiversity on your farm? So all the genetic variation, all the ecosystem parts. Who would do it simply because they want to see some environmental benefit? Just a show of hands. One or two. Oh, a few more creeping up. Thank you. Please be honest. Who would do it because outside pressures, social media says you should do it? Show of hands again. One or two. Not too many. And finally, who would do it if it would actually increase your farm profitability and give you access into markets? And I think everyone would probably be interested in increasing your farm profits. And that's a similar situation, all the show of hands, to what we actually saw at the CSC when I asked this question 2 years ago. So trends are similar. But what we have to remember is that biodiversity underpins natural capital. And we're going to hear, hopefully, a presentation tomorrow from Rain about the importance of natural capital on farms. Because in financial terms, it increases stability. It gives you resilience. You can ride the shocks of financial markets and climate scenarios. And what we mustn't forget, and we just heard from Sue and Rose, is the importance of this. It simply is, it is at the core of food production and all agricultural enterprise. And that's not to say you have to do it in a different way. You have to do it in a certain way. And what I'm trying to say today is it cuts across scales and enterprises. I'm not going to be prescriptive. I'm not going to say you need to do this, this, and this, because it's the concept of biodiversity that's important. So what have I been out doing? I've been around, I've looked at all different shapes and scales of farms, all different enterprises. I'm sure there are a lot of farms in this room and farmers who've been innovative that I wish I could have come and seen you as well. But time and money is limiting. The benefits of working with biodiversity in some cases is optimising production. And one farm I went to in the UK is a dairy farmer down in the southwest of England, Peter Wastonage, on his family farm. And here I'd just like to reiterate that idea of scale. Sometimes working with biodiversity, natural capital, you might think it's for small farms and hippies. Okay, Peter's gone from milking 130 cows to milking 2,700 using robust organic principles, and he's been doing this for 25 years. He's now decided he wants to boost his production back to the conventional levels comparative to other dairy farmers in the UK. And so he's decided to give away his organic accreditation, and he started to use minimal inputs to boost that production based on what he's already been doing for 25 years, improving his soil health and looking after it. And he's gone about that. He now is back up to 100% production compared to his peers, and he's using 25% of the amount of nitrogen that they use. His main inputs are molybdenum and boron, as well as that small amount of nitrogen fertiliser. Another benefit you might get is through market access, and this is direct market access to the public, to your customers. Horton House Farms, 100% grass-fed dairy in the UK. Again, been dairy farming for almost 30 years like this, very stable. They also have dairy beef, pigs and chickens integrated into the system. And in total, in terms of their cattle size, it's about 1,400 cows. Again, it's not a small operation. Mainly based on high-intensity rotational grazing, and what they're seeing is now through the system, they work in a nature-protected area, so they've got to be very careful what they do, and they're now seeing the return of a number of bird species that haven't been seen for a while, insect species, and even orchids that actually haven't been seen for between 50 to 100 years. So it's benefiting both the environment and their market access, because they supply into a 100% grass-fed organic certified system. And I'm just highlighting a couple. We visited a lot more farms than this, but this is Emmanuel here, a lovely French farmer, and he's a cropping farm. He's a crop farmer. He grows grains, and he puts all of that into his oil production. So he's actually been value-adding through. Emmanuel did it partly for the environmental reasons and productivity benefits, but also for health reasons. 25 years ago, he was bored. He was doing the same thing day out, day in, day out, spraying, cutting, harvesting. He was getting sick, and he put that down to the chemicals. But if we consider that as a secondary, he also had a massive problem with his canola crop in that the beetles were coming in, a least beetle, and they decimated that canola cropping across the whole region, and it was collapsing. Now, he was feeling unwell, he was bored, he wanted to change, so he started thinking, how can I change? I'm going to look around. He did a lot of reading. He found out about a parasitic wasp that would predate upon the beetle. And so he was thinking, how can I get these beetles, these wasps on my farm to eat beetles? And he realised he needed to create their habitat. He needed them close and living close so that they would come and feed. And so he created nature strips, or flowering strips, or little floral belts for the habitat for those beneficial insects. and he's been doing that ever since. He's increased his production. He is the only canola grower in that region now. The rest of them never bothered to try and take it up again. So he has a very niche market, and he value adds through that. So that's how individual farmers have been working, but how can we work at a broader level? The more people that we get involved, the more we can do. And the Farming for the Future program, I think, is a great Australian example of showing why we should be doing it and across a region. So the Farming for the Future program was looking at the value of natural capital on farms. And Rain, I think, is going to talk about this a lot more tomorrow. I haven't managed to speak to Rain. If she's here, my apologies. I would like to talk to you. But what it's linked is when we look at the assets on farm, often we're looking at this. Biodiversity and natural capital is not on our balance sheets. It's not really taught at ag school. Some farmers have actually been incorporating into their systems for decades. That humble progress. And I think that's where we've seen some of the progress in profitability that Rose was talking about. It's because farmers, and a great example, Australian croppers, is that now about 90% is all done with no-till. Now, that's a massive progress, done quietly, concentrating on soil health. Where's the greatest amount of biodiversity? In the soils. And so that's one way. But we need to get these biological and ecological assets onto the balance sheet, because what this program showed is more biodiversity on farms, greater profits. And it's done in two ways, mainly. This is a gross generalisation, but it's partly because you're reducing your costs and also because you're producing a high quality outcome from it. And then I have a slightly differing version of events in the Netherlands to Sue, and this is the Born Natuur program. So they are trying to change farmers' ways of doing things through incentives, but it is directly related to biodiversity outcomes. And so it is a beast, and I was lucky enough to talk to some of the executive members of the program. They are getting some funding from the EU, but it's also contributed to by the Dutch government and private enterprise, and then they don't call it a subsidy. They say it's a repayment for either the cost of making the change or potentially a loss in production. And that's been a rapidly increasing program. It started with seed funding of 50 million euros, it went to 100 million euros, and now it's at 600 million euros a year, helping farmers make these changes toward more biodiversity and environmentally friendly practices, while maintaining production. So they're leading the way, I think. So just to recap, I was given a little bit of extra time, so you just have to bear with me. This is a work in progress. I've tried to think about how I could summarise what I've learnt and what I've seen. And this was done on the back of an envelope. It was carried around France and Spain, talking to the farmers and agronomists there. And essentially it comes down to how close we work to a natural state. If you work in a closely natural state, this is at this end of the graph. So on the graph, we have how closely you farm to nature. This is high amount of nature, low amount of nature. Up here is production. Down here we have rewilding. So great for the environment, probably doesn't produce much food and is of some value. Up here we have larger, broader acre sort of operations that haven't concentrated on the environment whatsoever, but can produce a huge amount of food. They're very far from the natural state. And at the end of the day, it comes down to this. This is a really resilient system. It's got huge stability. It's not going to change very easily. Here, it's not very resilient, and it's going to have a lot of costs and risks associated. And I'm not saying there's one way to farm or another. It's simply, probably the most of us are farming somewhere in this middle section. I'm probably down here, where I concentrate on making sure I work with the ecological assets we have. Some other farmers, like Peter, are sort of in the middle. And then Emmanuel might be up here. The fact that he's doing some practices, but he's also concentrating on that production level. So how do we get this whole curve and farms to shift down this way towards more bio-friendly situations? We've already been doing it. We've heard that. In Australia, I think we're going really well with it. And I think up here is going to be driven by market forces. Down here, rewilding projects, they're driven by personal passion. In the middle, I think we're going to be driven by a mixture of things: market access, incentives, and education. But I think we need to rethink biodiversity. I think we've heard from Sue this morning that's the case. I think Rose highlighted to me these possible scenarios. I think rethinking biodiversity into both the landscape stewardship and climate survival is probably going to be a really good way of doing it, combining it into the two. I think if corporates and multinationals can also get into it, then we're going to be likely, but they're going to be up at that high end of the system. And so probably the most likely way we're going to get change is through market access and profitability to drive, because that's what we've been going through before. Now, I'd just like to... How much longer have I got? Sorry.
Well, we have gone over. But I was going to... We have gone over, but later on in the schedule, one of our presenting scholars hasn't been able to make it. So we are going to allow you to speak a little bit longer, Iain. We'll just shift things along, and I'll make that work. So you're okay for a couple of minutes, Max.
Okay, thank you. It's so good to have a Scottish accent up here. They're just so trustworthy. So quickly moving on, recommendations, planting seeds. Now I've thrown myself. We need to make sure, as Sue said, we're sharing the costs. Farmers should not be at the brunt of this. We have to remember, as in one of those previous slides, farming is at the core of society. And I think we need to make sure that in our narratives, we remind people that farming is actually an essential service. We often talk in Australian farming terms, we're businesses, we're generating profit, aren't we doing well? But actually at the bottom of the line, civil societies were based on agriculture. And we need to remind society of that. Without food, we're going to fail. And we often hear the narrative. In Ireland, it's really prevalent. Thank a farmer, feed a farmer, every time you eat. You know, they are very proud of their farming, and now everyone wants their products. So when we're telling the story, we need to make sure we're saying it. We are seeing progress towards, in Australia, actually getting some financial comeback outcomes for farmers. So Farming for the Future showed us how we can do it on a bigger scale. The Nature Repair Market Scheme is coming, but at the moment it's quite a black box. We don't have good metrics, we don't know how it's going to take shape, but we need to make sure that we learn from the carbon market, which, in my personal opinion, yes, it may be world leading, it's still got a lot of flaws, and I don't think it benefits farmers. Because we need to make sure that we keep agricultural land productive for food and fibre, not being simply put aside for offsets. That's probably some non-agricultural corporates' idea of heaven right now. But what do we want as farmers? We want to make sure we still keep producing food and being at the base of society. And for that, we need to make sure that we concentrate on stocks and not fluxes. And simply by that, I mean what we've already got and then what we can grow on top of it. We shouldn't be simply looking at how much we change or only incrementally increasing change. I don't think that helps us actually in farming. We need cost-effective metrics. And here, this is a rapidly evolving market. Every day in my social media feed, I see new things saying, oh, biodiversity is coming in, oh, nature capital, all of these things. It's being forced at us. Maybe that's just my algorithm. But what we are seeing is that business is also in there. So Greenham's, just last week, released their new sustainability standard. And this was a pilot scheme, 20 farms across Victoria and Tasmania, where they've actually put biodiversity into their sustainability framework. And that's based on Australia's beef and sheep meat sustainability frameworks. They think that 80% of their farmers already meet that standard. And it's simply helping people catch up with the admin to actually promote that and tell the story. So again, I think it highlights that in Australia, we're actually doing a good job. We're quite a long way there. Sure, we can do more, but we're actually doing a good job. And that should encourage us to take those little steps to go further. And as I've mentioned, I haven't spoken about specifically how farmers can do that, but I'm quite happy to take questions afterwards. And we just need to make sure that farmers are leading the way. I said I feel lucky, and I feel lucky and thankful because I've had such amazing support. The J.M. Roberts Foundation and the UTAS for actually backing me, for Nuffield Australia for giving me the opportunity, Jodie and her team, thank you very much. Rob for giving me the phone call finally after 4 attempts to get a Nuffield Scholarship to say, you can go this time. All the farmers I've met around the world, in Australia, you're awesome. And I've learned so much from you. And this is the start of my journey. I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly curious. And then finally, my family, my staff and my friends, because they've actually helped pick everything up while I've been away and enable me to do it. So thank you very much. Kate's over in the background, so this has been a shared journey, so thank you very much.